All right, so I wrote a book a few years ago called Cloudonomics that gets into economic optimization and performance optimization of clouds, and it looks at things like why hybrids are economically optimal, all things being equal, and looks at the economics of service node build-outs for content delivery networks and a whole bunch of things like that. And it's great, but it was a very quantitative, equation-laden book. Okay, so as I was writing it, I realized, I'm writing all this stuff about performance optimization, and I'm missing something that I really believe in, which is that the cloud and IT more broadly is not just about cost reduction, it's also about revenue growth and can be strategic. So that actually became the basis of my new book, Digital Disciplines, which just came out from Wiley CIO like 8 days ago or whatever in hardcover. And so you don't have to buy the book, although obviously it would be great if you did. I'm going to give you a super fast fly-through of the logic of the book, but it's 400 pages, so obviously I'm not going to do it all justice. So the first question is to create strategic competitive advantage using the cloud and related technologies like the Internet of Things and big data and analytics and mobile and wireline networks and so forth. The question is, how exactly do you do that? Now, there's a classic book that is a great read even today, 20 years later, called The Discipline of Market Leaders from Michael Tracy, the guy with the bow tie, and Fred Wiersema, if you remember them, CSC Index, and Michael Hammer and James Champy and reengineering and all of that. And to keep it very simple, what they said is that there are 3 main ways in which companies can differentiate themselves and create unparalleled customer value. The first one is what they call product leadership, in other words, better products and services. Another is operational excellence, so the notion of having better processes where better is defined as lower cost, more convenient for users, and so forth. And then the third is customer intimacy, in other words, better customer relationships. So those are all still valid, right? So any company can help carve out a strategic niche for themselves by focusing on one of those things. And there's lots of examples. What they used as examples include Michael Dell and the early days of Dell Computer, which transformed a make-to-order and then high inventory distribution mechanism using distributors and retailers into a make-to-order, much lower cost, and yet custom products. In other words, better processes. So there are a lot of examples. I won't have time to go into them, but the basic point is that I took that value disciplines model, as they call it, and I said, what's different in the digital era? So is it just it's the same stuff as usual, operational excellence, product leadership, and customer intimacy, or are there ways in which digital technologies actually make a difference? So briefly, what I sort of, as I thought my way through this, the first observation is that it isn't just about physical operational excellence anymore. It's really about information excellence that can complement, extend, or replace those operations. And I'll explain more about that in a second. Another thing that happens is rather than thinking about standalone products like a nice watch or a nice car, we're really now talking about an entire solution that includes smart digital products coupled over a network to the cloud and data collection and aggregation and analytics, and also from there onto an ecosystem of partner capabilities and extensible capabilities. Think about something like an iPad and its ability to download apps as an example. The third major area is customer intimacy, and rather than just saying that traditional face-to-face relationships that were personally mediated in the real world move now online into social networks, there's actually a big data portion to that, and I'll cover that in a second. And the one thing that I didn't think that Tracy and Wiersema did quite the right analysis of is the nature of innovation as sort of a generic meta strategy. Customers value those companies that are more innovative beyond or above and beyond anything that relates simply to today's product or service portfolio. So accelerated innovation is in there. So I'm going to delve briefly into each of these, and you'll get kind of the sense. So the evolution of operational excellence to information excellence A good example of operational excellence that had a major impact both economically and socially is the Ford Model T car, right? It was not really a better car than any of the cars that were available at that time, but it was a very different process. It was the first to use interchangeable parts in mass production and therefore dramatically reduced the cost of automobile acquisition, making automobiles ubiquitous and causing all the traffic we see on 101 now. Now, that has evolved to the present time to information excellence, and here my model is, rather than a statically designed automobile assembly line or paper mill or oil refinery or what have you, think about a modern port that has all kinds of data coming in, structured, unstructured, in terms of bills of lading, where the containers are in the port, crane positions, ships based on GPS, trucks, video feeds, and what you're trying to do is solve this NP-complete problem of, and also multi-criteria, because you're trying to minimize labor costs, you're trying to enhance safety, you're trying to minimize ship time and dock, you're trying to solve this sort of bin packing and stacking problem with cranes and containers. So it's a very complex problem, and you've got to solve it dynamically on a continuous basis. Another good example is UPS Orion system, which basically manages 55,000 routes that they have just domestically. Each of those routes has on average 120 different stops. And the math there surprised even me, because you think 120 stops, that's a lot. Most of you know that's traveling salesman, which is NP complete. But the sheer combinatorics are pretty crazy, because 120 factorial is actually roughly 10 to the 200th. So that's a lot of different possible combinations to evaluate on an ongoing basis for 55,000 routes. And of course, you're trying to do a number of things in terms of route optimization. Another good example of information excellence is digital physical fusion. Burberry is a great example of that. Think about the notion of ordering online, picking up in store, or being able to order in store off of an iPad, pick it up online. There's a thing called Burberry World that ties together their back-end suppliers with employees, so they really have figured this out, and as a result, the former CEO of Burberry, Angela Ahrendts, managed to grow 3 times faster than the luxury goods market over a 10-year period. And as most of you know, she's now SVP of retail at a little company down the street called Apple. Another good example is Uber, and people like to talk about what Uber did, but thinking about it in this context, what they really did is they didn't have better physical operations of a cab service. They leveraged information technology and the cloud, broadly speaking, to be able to provide a matching engine between people needing rides and drivers that have rides. They also use an on-demand pay-per-use capability to transform the capital asset portion of their business and improve return on invested capital by not investing in a major vehicle fleet, not having a lot of employees, although that's still a little bit up for grabs, I guess. But so they've made both process improvements and resource improvements, ultimately leveraging information technology in a cloud-centric model. Another good example down the street here is 23andMe, which most of you know sell $99 DNA kits. But it turns out that is not their core business, regardless of what they say. Their core business, it turns out, is selling that data, and it's with user permission, so there's nothing illicit here. They made more money in one deal selling data to Genentech than they have in their entire history selling DNA kits. So there's lots of opportunities for anybody. If you take UPS, obviously, you could sell data that you collect that has to do with traffic congestion or typical trends in traffic congestion or what have you. Last example I'll use is Li & Fung, which is one of the largest clothing manufacturers in the world. It has exactly 0 factories. So they have tens of billions of dollars in revenue each year, but their configuration as a company is not just a virtual company, the way that Apple uses Foxconn for manufacturing. It uses a network of over 10,000 suppliers, and it dynamically reconfigures that constellation of suppliers on a daily or hourly basis. So right now, thread might come from, let's say, South Korea, fabric from Japan, and buttons from Thailand, and then 5 minutes from now, it's a completely different configuration. So again, there's an example of a cloud-centric model, and you can think about things like the SAP Ariba Commerce Network doing similar things to enable this not just virtual networked corporation, but a dynamic virtual networked corporation. To understand the critical importance of the evolution of products to this connected world, think about the difference between a great traditional product like a Rolex Cosmograph Daytona timepiece, great materials, it's diamonds and gold and titanium and platinum and God knows what, and you know, the brand of Rolex and nice shops and I don't know, Swiss chocolates nearby, but it's just a watch at the end of the day. Contrast that with a smart digital connected product like the Apple Watch edition, and what you see there is obviously the notion of connectivity, which in turn offers lots of new capabilities. So one capability it enables is adaptive intelligence, like the Nest Learning thermostat. So that's the smart digital component. But beyond that, what Nest shows is that the connected component enabled extensibility and upgradability. So they issued a new release of their software that improves power consumption by 6% for consumers and businesses. Another good example is the Tesla, where they took the base physical configuration and they've downloaded collision detection capability, and they allegedly will be also downloading driverless car functionality. So again, this physical connection enables what is usually known as the core or expected or augmented product to now be realized as the potential product. In other words, what you get out of the box is not what that product ultimately becomes, and there's an option value or net present value, a future functionality that translates into the present. Another good example is the evolution of services to experiences. Disney Magic Bands is an example. Some park visitors can get bands, and as they walk through the park, basically what happens is rather than just seeing various theme park attractions, they can optimize things like their park wait by doing sort of an electronic fast pass. But also, rather than Mickey sort of standing there like this and waving, Mickey can now go, "Hi, Billy, how are you? How was your trip down from Iowa today?" and get a very personalized, rich, magical experience. Yet another example is what Nike is able to do through the Nike Plus ecosystem and the whole API around that, et cetera, with the idea being that rather than just being focused on selling you sneakers or running shorts, there's now this ecosystem of product capabilities, both from Nike and partners that do things like activity tracking, body fat measurement, et cetera. And so you can get from ephemeral experiences into permanent physical transformations. And then the other thing is that a physical connection can enable an ongoing customer connection. That customer connection, in turn, can enable the selling company, whether it's a product supplier or a service provider, to focus on customer outcomes. A good example there is GE with the Gen X jet engine that basically can get paid based on time on wing, which in turn incents companies to be able to do better predictive maintenance, which in turn requires lots of sensors in each engine and analytics around that to do better preventive maintenance. Gamification is also prevalent throughout all of this. A good example is what O-Power does, and they have sort of gamified electric consumption, so they will tell you that your consumption is higher than 70% of your neighbors, which turns out to be the most effective way to transform behavior. Collective intimacy is the evolution of customer intimacy, and if the old model of customer intimacy was the butcher, the tailor, the physician, or what have you, the new model is moving to taking data from you, convolving it all together through a recommendation engine, and thereby being able to pull strong inferences out of weak signals embedded in big data and generate personalized recommendations that are a mix of popular content as well as personalized content, expected plus delight. And so it's a great example of this notion of collective intimacy, which is more than just individual customer intimacy at scale. It enables all this other capability based on big data. It isn't just entertainment, because the Mayo Clinic does a similar thing. What they do is they leverage enormous repositories of genomic data, epigenetic data, pharmacological efficacy data, in other words, how effective different drugs are to different people based on their genetic makeup and their particular disease, and also microbiomic data, in other words, skin and gut bacteria, to be able to develop personalized medicine or patient-specific therapies that are the most effective, personalized recommendation instead of movies, healthcare for that individual. The last thing I'll cover is the evolution of innovation. Innovation used to look like the Edison lab. From the Edison lab, it evolved into sort of corporate research labs. Then it evolved into open innovation with the notion of partnering with others outside the firm to be able to either bring intellectual property in or take corporately developed intellectual property and move it out to the edge and partners. And so now that's giving way to cloud-mediated innovation through things like innovation networks, idea markets, contests, challenges, and so forth. And so this is the standard, of course, profile. You've got a problem. You provide it to the cloud. Examples are the Netflix Prize or GE Flight Quest or Hospital Quest. And so the Netflix Prize, you may know, was there was a progress prize and a final prize for improvements made to the Cinematch recommendation engine. Another good example is what Procter & Gamble did. They had the idea for Pringles Prints, which was printing jokes or cartoons or trivia questions on Pringles potato crisps or potato-based crisps. And thank you. But they didn't have the technology, and so they used an innovation network, found a baker in Italy that had already perfected this. And lastly, a good example is GE Flight Quest 1 and 2, where what Flight Quest did is it was a contest intended to better predict arrival times, and Flight Quest 2 was intended to improve arrival times. Massive database was published of scheduled and actual flight arrivals, airborne particulates, weather data, and there were a few winners that used some sophisticated analytics algorithms to provide that. So the point of all of this is that the technologies that we're developing are about more than cost reduction or operations excellence in terms of IT operations. They really can be the fundamental enabler of business strategy. So today, what I believe is that those of us in this room and those of us working in this field are really doing God's work in terms of both societal value and creating strategic advantage for businesses. Okay, so with that, that's the end of my presentation. All right.